to those of who are celebrating. It's a Holy Thursday today, and Chag Sameach for those that are celebrating Passover this week. And I also want to say happy pre-Ramadan, although we're not in Ramadan, but this is one of the things I wanted to do before Ramadan started. So I'm Dr. Mehnaz Afridi. I'm the director of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center, and I'm also associate professor of religious studies. And I'm really happy that you're all here. I'm more thrilled that Hussein is here because we've been talking about getting him here for a while now. So I just want to say a few words about the center and how we are really focused on the lessons of the Holocaust, genocide, and also interfaith education. So our goal is basically to eradicate prejudice. And what we do is we do a lot of different kinds of programming that has to do with the Holocaust, other genocides. We've done 2 different programs on the Uyghur genocide in China. We've done work with the Rohingya Muslims, and we are looking forward to doing work with looking at Darfur and some testimonies in the fall. We also, of course, are going to be commemorating on April 8th, Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day, with Joni Schwerm, who is a Holocaust survivor's daughter, who's written a book about her father and the letters that she found all the way from Shanghai all the way to North Africa. So that will be our last event for the spring, but we invite you back in the fall. We have about 10 to 12 events a year. And we also have done some programming this semester on racial and social justice, white nationalism, Black racism, Islamophobia, and anti-Semitism. So, having a Holocaust Center and Genocide Center is not easy because we really focus on racism. And unfortunately, that's been the climate for us in the last few years. I wanted to say a few things about what I do. So I teach religion in the Holocaust, religion and genocide. I teach the Islam courses at Manhattan College. I teach Muslims in America. I teach Islamic literature. I teach women in Islam. And I also teach religion and violence. So it's been a very interesting journey, but I wear 2 hats at the same time in 2, I think, very connected fields. And hence that is what my work is about. But I'm very excited today because I am teaching the senior seminar in religious studies. And the seminar is on the Qur'an. So we are reading, a group of us, which is 16 students and I, going through the Qur'an in different ways, picking out topics that they're interested in, and they reflect every week on the reading that we do, every surah that we have read. So I was talking to Hussein, and I know Hussein has so many talents. He's multi-talented and has done so much work, and I will introduce him formally, that he said, hey, Mehnaz, if you're teaching this, then let me do something on Al-Fatiha, which is the opening of the Qur'an. And I was like, yes, let's do it, because I really want the students to benefit from somebody else's voice and somebody else's understanding of what it means to read the Qur'an. And I know Hussein's talent of art and also looking at different images is far beyond mine. So I'm very delighted to have tonight Dr. Hussein Rashid, and he and I met many years ago when I moved to New York, I believe, which is almost 10 years now. And he is a freelance academic. Like I said, he's multi-talented, currently affiliated with several universities in New York City. He's a scholar of religion focusing on Muslims and US popular culture. He is also the founder of Islamicate L3C, a consultancy focusing on religious literacy and cultural competency. He co-edited a book on Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, called Miss Marvel's America. He is currently co-editing a volume on Islam and popular culture and another volume on Islam in North America. He is also co-authoring a cultural history of Muslims in America. His current projects include an independent film, a documentary, a museum project of Manhattan as a content expert on their exhibit, America to Zanzibar, Muslim Cultures Near and Far. So if you want to learn more about Hussein, it's www.husseinrashid.com. And I really want to welcome you, Hussein. Thank you so much for being here, and just take it away. The way we're going to do this is that Hussein will present, and that Ireland Twiggs, my student assistant, We'll be taking questions in the chat in about 35 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Manaz, for that lovely and generous introduction and for the invitation to join you here today. And Ireland for helping out on the back end, and for all of you for being here and spending your evening. It's one of the few times I've been grateful for a cold snap in April, since nobody's out and about today. I know you've got nothing to do but to be here or binge watch something on Hulu. So I'm glad you're spending it with us instead. I want to start by talking a little bit, excuse me, by just framing the discussion, why I spoke to Manaz about why Surah Al-Fatiha. As Manaz mentioned, Surah Al-Fatiha is the opening chapter of the Qur'an. It is something that appears in, that opens all liturgical prayers, as well as very many extra liturgical prayers. It is something that Muslims will recite as they begin an exam, before they go on a journey. And so it's described as the oft repeated verses of the Quran. And I think because of it's also the longest continuous prayer in the Quran. So as a result, I think because of its brevity and its depth, it becomes a really useful way to think about how Muslims interact with culture. So not that Muslim culture is totally defined by the Quran, but you cannot escape the Quran. And I think that Fatiha is a good way to begin that. So what I want to do as we go through this is really look at some visual aspects, but really think about meaning and commentary and how this plays out. And then sometimes the sound arts. How does this come out in sound and practice? In addition to being called the oft-repeated verses, the Quran is also known as al-Kitab, the mother of the book. The 7 oft-repeated verses: Ash-Shifa, the healing; Al-Asas, the foundation; As-Salat, the prayer; Al-Kafiyah, the sufficient; Al-Kanz, the treasure; and An-Nur, the light. So you can hear in those words, it's a treasure, it's a prayer, it's a light, it's a healing, right? The ways in which Fatiha functions in Muslim devotional life. So as we go through this, and again, this is really, we have a limited amount of time. Normally I do, 3 hours on this just to introduce my students. We don't have that much time. And I don't think anybody's invested in that much time, especially since we're over dinner hour. But I want to focus just on 2 particular aspects for today. The first is understanding the Quran or Fatiha as an oral text, and then Fatiha as a written text. So what happens as the Quran goes from a oral text to a written text. And I think here it's probably worth just mentioning a word about the Quran as an oral text. Quran, of course, the root behind it means it can be read as either to read or to recite. And we understand in English, reading and reciting are 2 different functions. Reading is a private silent act, reciting is a public vocal act. But in most languages, to read and to recite is not, that distinction isn't there. Questions of literacy come into play, and we don't need to get into that. But to understand that the Quran starts primarily as an oral text, it is first heard before it is read. And even now, and Manaz, I'm sure, can speak more to this, that if you study the Quran, but you only study it as in its book form, right? You only read about the Quran, you're not considered versed in Quranic sciences from a Muslim scholastic perspective. You have to learn it orally. You have to be engaged with a teacher who engages with you with this oral tradition as well as the written tradition. And so what I want to do is just give you a sense. I'm not going to translate what's being said just now. I will translate in a moment. But I just want you to hear what Surah Al-Fatiha sounds like. And so this particular recording that I want to play for you is from Michael Sell's, is a recording from Michael Sell's volume Approaching the Quran. And it is a recording by an Egyptian reciter by the name of Minshawi. And I just want you to hear what you hear. I'm not going to tell you what to listen for, but just hear what you hear. And then I want to point out a couple of things as we listen to it.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
And so I hope in listening to that, there are two things I want to highlight. In listening to that, one, you heard the emotive quality of his voice. Some of you may be thinking it sounds like he's about to cry or he's crying as he's doing a recitation. And if you didn't, that's okay. We are zooming this, but he does have this very strong quality of being near tears. It sounds, his voice is quivering. If you close your eyes and imagine him as he's doing this recitation, you can imagine tears coming down his face. This is a sign of a good recitation when the reciter cries. Now, in Arabic, the term that's used is huzn. It's often translated as sorrow, which I don't think is an apt description. What this is a sense of awe. The reciter is reciting God's words as it was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his family, and so is feeling this sense of proximity to the divine and the sense of distance to the divine simultaneously. And in that presence feels this awe, and in that awe is humbled. And so sorrow is perhaps not the right word, but longing, or a sense of nostalgia is not the right word either, but a sense of just desiring for something that has not been realized. And this desire for that, it's a very deep primal urge. The second thing that you may have heard is that the text has a rhyming quality to it. You may have heard that this constant refrain of the "e" sound. It's a long I with a sort of nasal at the end of it, and that's the rhyme at the end, the terminal rhyme. And I'm going to play another recording for you in a second where that's a little bit more clear. But in addition to that terminal rhyme, there's a medial rhyme, a rhyme in the middle, which is a long A, or what we call a diphthong, an ow or an a sound, IE sound in the middle. So I just want you, as we listen to this recitation, to pay attention for this. By the way, that this first recording I played for you is a recording that was done during the period of Ramadan. So this is something that style of recitation that you'd hear during the time of Ramadan. This next one is one that's used for what's called zikr, remembering God's name, and it's done in a group setting.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
And so hopefully in that version, you heard at the very least the terminal rhyme, that E sound coming across more clearly, a very rhythmic, very paced sort of way of doing this. This recording is from Algeria. It's from the first CD of a 3D CD set called Music from the World of Islam. And this is in fact a funny story. This is actually how I got interested in this field. Was in an undergraduate, I had to take a music course for my humanities spread as an undergraduate. And my instructor was an ethnomusicologist. And he actually played an LP of this recording. And it took me 15 years to find it, to get my own copy of it. But it was a thing that got me really interested in the idea of the sound arts of the Muslim world. But here again, you see that you go from this very isolated recitation, which is done for a group, to now the second recording where a group is participating in the recitation of the Qur'an. But this is how it is heard, how it is practiced, how it is embodied, if you will, in terms of trying to engage with the Quranic text. I have one more oral text to share with you, one more recording to share with you. And this is going to go for a little bit longer. And I should ask just before I continue, Ireland or Manaz, how has the audio been? Has it been okay? Yeah, okay, great. I just realized I should check that before moving forward. So let's just listen to this one. Oh, play. There we go.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين In the morning when we wake Bismillah, Bismillah with
So this one, in case it wasn't obvious, is from a children's CD. It's by Dawood Warnsby Ali. It's from a CD called The Colors of Islam, which is a children's CD about how to be a Muslim. And so it starts with a recitation of Surah Fatiha, and then it turns into this song in the morning when we wake, in the morning when we pray, Bismillah, Bismillah. Right. And so there's this idea that you start in the morning, as I said, it's a liturgical and extra liturgical prayer, that you start with Surah Fatiha, and as you go through your day, you're always remembering the verses as you go through your day. So again, you see how this becomes part of a cultural engagement, right? A cultural substrate for the culture to grow and build up and out of. So that it is not always explicit, but it is always present and always there. Here, of course, something with a very explicit material, but to think about the ways in which something that is always part of your every action, how that then gets understood, whether it's explicit or not, outside of that text. So when we go from the oral text, and this is just a quick introduction to the oral text, when we move from the oral text to the written text, then we certain things start happening, certain things start being enabled by the shift to a written text. And the first thing I want to do is to show you what the text looks like in Arabic. All right, now this text is actually a modified Urdu script font, but it does something for me visually that I think is very important. So each of these lines, and don't worry if you can't read it, I'm going to do a transliteration and translation in a second. But what I want you to do is just visually, just as you were listening to the sounds of the Quran, now I want you to look at what the Quran looks like. And part of the reason I like this font is each of these lines is a verse from the Quran. And what you see is that you have roughly equal weight to the line. So if you think metrically, if you think in terms of rhyme, there's a certain balance, there's a certain continuity that runs across each verse until you get to the last verse where it looks so long. It looks almost double the length. And in fact, metrically, it is double the length. It has a double rhyme in it, and it has a finality to it in recitation that draws out its meaning. So if we understand the Quran as an oral text, what this written text does is allow us to visualize what it is we're hearing, right? Again, not necessarily being able to read it, but thinking about, okay, there's a straightness, there's a continuity that then holds you at its very end. So thinking about what's happening and what's being reflected here. So let's go to our transliteration and translation. And I've alternated the verse lines here. The first line is a transliteration of the Arabic, and then we've got the translation. So what I want to do is just go through the transliteration, go through the Arabic with you, and then come to the translation. So it begins, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Adna siratal mustaqim. Siratal ladina an'amta alayhim. Ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladallin. And so you get this sound, that rhyme that I mentioned before, and then you also see the medial rhyme, the long A sound or the diphthong, the ow sound coming in throughout the text. And then the translation, and we'll talk a little bit about what's happening as we go through what the written text means. But as you look at the translation, it is, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, all praise to the Lord of the worlds, the compassionate, the merciful, the Lord of the day of judgment. You alone we worship, you alone we seek for help. Guide us to the straight path, the path of the blessed ones, not the cursed ones, nor the lost ones. And so as you read this, I want you to just notice a couple of things. Compassionate and merciful is repeated twice. The idea of Lord of the worlds, Lord of the day of judgment is repeated, but different words are used. Rabb for Lord up here, Malik for Lord here. More akin to king or having some sense of ownership, as opposed to Rabb, which is sort of master. And so as you read this, you say, okay, this is what this says in English, but in Arabic, there's certain questions. Why Rabb as opposed to Malik? What are the connotative differences? What does that mean? But even in English, we can start asking questions about this text. Guide us to the straight path. Obvious question is, what is a straight path? The path of the blessed ones. What is that path, and who are the blessed ones? Not the cursed ones, nor the lost ones. Who are the cursed ones, and who are the lost ones? So these are all questions that become incredibly important for Muslim commentary tradition, or Muslim questioning of what does this text mean? How do we engage with it? How do we make meaning out of this in ways that are spiritually, functionally important to us? So when we look at the written text, the first thing we have to understand that as we shift from an oral text to a written text, the meaning of the text becomes fixed. That you start assigning meaning in written language that doesn't necessarily exist in an oral language. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Just take a look at this set of words. I'm not going to read it out loud. I'm going to ask you to read it on your own just for a second. Now, if I read this set of words, you'll notice there's no punctuation here. Woman, without, her, man, is, nothing. These are the set of words. What does this sentence mean? It needs punctuation. So if you start thinking about how to punctuate this, or what came to your mind immediately, some of you may have thought, woman, without her, man is nothing. So here I've inserted 2 commas and a period. Somebody invariably points out that I'm better served with a colon rather than 2 commas, but bear with me. 2 commas and a period. So woman, without her, man is nothing, indicating that man is nothing without a woman. But you could have also read it without changing any of the words, sequence, order. Woman, without her man, is nothing, giving that same set of words a very different meaning, that woman is nothing without a man, without her man, using the exact same set of punctuation. And so this is what the shift to written text does, is it begins to fix meaning. And so we have to start asking, who is writing the text? How are they inserting meaning into the text? Versus when you hear the text orally, how it can be heard, which could be quite different than how the reciter intends it in their recitation. Can be quite different. The next thing that the written tradition allows is the emergence of a commentary tradition, or what we call tafsir. Tafsir is a commentary tradition because now that you have the text written, you can start thinking about your headspace, if you will, is cleared of the text and thinking only of the text and saying, okay, what does this text mean? So you get the emergence of a commentary or tafsir tradition written. And so let's talk about some of the commentaries around Surah Al-Fatiha. It is called the double revelation. It is revealed twice, once in Mecca, once in Medina, 2 very important cities for the early Muslim community in the life of Prophet Muhammad. And here, this is a hadith Qudsi. This is a reported conversation between God and the Prophet Muhammad as to what is the nature of Surah Al-Fatiha. And in this Hadith Qudsi, God says, I divide the form of prayer between me and my worshipper in two halves. Half of it belongs to him. My worshipper says when he commences the formal prayer, in the name of God, the infinitely merciful, the compassionate. Thus my worshipper mentions me. Then he says, praise belongs to God, the Lord of the worlds. So I say, my worshipper has praised me. Then he says, the infinitely merciful, the compassionate. So I say, my worshipper has lauded me. Then he says, master of the day of judgment. So I say, my worshipper has glorified me. Then he says, it is you we owe worship, and it is you we ask for help. So this verse is between me and my worshipper in two halves. The rest of the chapter belongs to my worshipper, and for my worshipper is whatever he requests. So here in this Hadith Qudsi, God is saying that you can imagine Surah Al-Fatiha in two halves. The first half is praising God, and then the second half is the supplication, where the reciter or the reader can ask of God whatever that person wants. If we go back to the commentary tradition, and let me turn just very briefly back to our translation. If we look at the commentary tradition, they say, okay, so here in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, all praise to the Lord of the worlds, the compassionate, the merciful, the Lord of the day of judgment, you alone we worship, you alone we seek for help. That this is the transition point. So this half is praising God, the second half is the ask from the believer. Okay, and so what they say is, you alone we worship, and you see that the mirror of that is, you alone we seek for help. Because we only worship you, we only turn to you for help. And then they continue reading as a call and response almost. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, guide us to the straight path. Because God, you're compassionate and merciful, guide us to the straight path. All praise to the Lord of the worlds, the path of the blessed ones. Because you know all that exists, then show us or guide us to the path of the most blessed. Because you are the Lord of the worlds, you know the best path, guide us to that blessed path, or the path of the blessed ones. The compassionate, the merciful, not the cursed ones. Because you are compassionate and merciful, keep us from being cursed. The Lord of the day of judgment, because you will judge us, keep us from being lost. So that there's each verse, the praise of God mirrors the ask from God. That there's a very strong relationship between those verses and the asking present within. And then there's a very strong commentary tradition around the letters. This is what's called this mystical interpretation of the letters. So the first three letters of the phrase Bismillah in Arabic are B, S, and M. You don't count the vowels, you only count the consonants. And so there's one commentary, this is by one of the descendants of Prophet Muhammad, known as Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, peace be upon him, where he offers two readings of this BSM. He says the B stands for Bab, which is the gate of prophethood. The S is Sir, which is the secret of prophethood. And the M is Mamlaka, which is the kingdom of faith. So that by reading the Bismillah, you are saying, I am entering the gate of prophethood, seeking the secret of prophethood or the secret of the teachings of Prophet Muhammad in order to enter the kingdom of faith. So that even by reciting the Qur'an, by reciting the Fatiha, it is about deepening your faith and understanding of the faith. He also says, Imam Jafar says that the B stands for Baha, which is the brilliance of God. S is Sana, the radiance of God. M is for Majd, the glory of God. So that every time, not even every line, but every letter of the Quran is about praising God and recognizing God's majesty through the recitation of the Quran. So that it is about recognizing God in every moment, in every atom, in every part of the construction. And now I've mentioned a couple of times Rabb al-Alameen, the Lord of the worlds. And so why does the Quran talk about worlds? Basic commentary says heaven, hell, and earth. But the idea is, I think, more expansive. The commentary tradition holds that you can also talk about the multiplicity of creation. That God has created, it would be hubris to think that we are all the world that we know about. I also forgot the jinn, the genies. God created the genies as well. Can't forget the jinn. But that it would be hubris for us to think that we are the only creation. and that there's a multiplicity of creation, but also within what we conceive of as the world, there are worlds. And as Manaz hinted at the beginning, that there are parallel societies, parallel cultures that exist even within our own borders of the United States, let alone across borders. So that God is the Lord of all of this, not just our particular world or our particular worldview, but of all of creation. And it has a nice resonance with Quran 49:13, which is God created us tribes and nations that we may know one another. So that in that difference, and this is a refrain that comes throughout the Quran, in that difference is a blessing and is a way for us to learn from each other about the divine nature. And then, as I mentioned in talking about the Surah Al-Fatiha, we asked, what is the straight path? Is it straight? Is it actually straight? If it's straight, is it a short path? Like once we find it, are we guaranteed heaven? If we take the long way around, can we still get into heaven? If we trip and fall off the path, are we guaranteed hell? Can we get back on the path? And so a British commentator, modern British commentator, Azizuddin Sardar, he argues that, in fact, the path that is being called for here, guide us to the right path, is not a specific way or road. It's not, we make a mistake when we think about it in terms of physicality, but it's a matter of travel. It's a process. So the straight path for each of us is very different, because the idea is that you are always striving to be on the straight path. It's part of a process. It is, again, thinking about pride, to think, I know what the straight path is and I know how to get there. Rather, it's that constant struggle to be on the straight path, recognizing that we have the tendency to be tempted to come off the straight path. So continuously, the reason we pray for constantly being guided to the straight path is recognizing that we will not always be on it, consciously or unconsciously. So how do we make sure that we're following that process? And then we get different readings. How do we approach reading of the Quran? And here Imam Jafar, this is the descendant of Prophet Muhammad, who I mentioned earlier, he says that there are 4 ways of reading the Quran. He says there's a literal way of reading the Quran, and this is the way of the common people, that if you don't have any special training, you'll read the Quran and you'll take it for what it says. You'll accept it as it is. Then you have the realm of allusion. You will look for allegory, metaphor. You will look for deeper meaning. And this is the way of the elite, the scholastic class, the people who've been trained in this. Then you'll look for the subtleties. What is it that the Quran is really trying to express to you? And this is for the friends of God, the awliya, the people who committed themselves to God. This goes beyond scholastic knowing, and in fact may be completely separate from scholastic knowledge. And then finally, you have the knowledge of the deepest realities, which is a station only reserved for the prophets, because God has given them a special knowledge or a special access to the deepest realities of the Quran, or revelation writ large. And so the idea is that the Quran is a multi-layered text, and different people approach it in different ways. Not that one is better than the other, that there's a progression. For example, you can't work your way into being a prophet in Muslim thought, but that you have to understand that each of these readings involves other types of discipline in terms of how you approach the Quran. Then you have the 10th century historian Tabari, and he says the Quran is complete unto itself and it unfolds itself. And what he means by this is that as you approach the Quran, it has one layer of meaning, and then you read it again and it has another layer of meaning, and you read it again and you open another layer of meaning. And it reveals to you what you are ready for and what you need to be revealed to you at the time. So that each time you read the Quran, it gives you new meaning and new insight. And then the 13th century Persian poet, Jalaluddin Rumi, he says, creation is commentary. That everywhere you look, this is the greatest tafsir, of the greatest commentary on the Quran, is what God has created. And there's a beautiful parallel, practicing what he preaches. So the first revelation, Surah Al-Fatiha is not the first revelation of the Quran, it's the first chapter of the Quran. The first revelation of the Quran is this phrase, Iqra, which means either read or recite. It's an imperative. The angel Gabriel has come to the Prophet Muhammad and said, Iqra. And the first line of Rumi's great poem, the Masnavi, is the imperative, listen, Bashno. And so here, if Rumi's Masnavi is meant to be a commentary on the Quran, with first revelation is recite, then Rumi's first command is listen. God is speaking. And so you have this commentary, and then he gets into this, Rumi that is, gets into this beautiful imagery of this reed bed, using nature to function as a commentary on the Quran. And so you have this idea that God has given us all the knowledge of the Quran throughout creation. So the written tradition gives us the commentary tradition, also gives rise to the legal tradition, which I'm not going to get into right now, and it gives rise to the calligraphic tradition, this visual imagery, right? So if the idea is that the Quran is the word of God as revealed to Prophet Muhammad, and to recite it is an obligation because it is the word of God, to recite it beautifully is a necessity. And so once the written tradition happens, then a similar thought process occurs, and you want to start writing the text beautifully. And you get these really outstanding pieces of artwork around the Quran. I could do just weeks on this. There's so much material, but I just want to highlight a couple of different pieces. This is a page of the Quran, Surah Al-Fatiha. This is what looks like gold, or what I hope looks like gold to you is in fact gold ink. The blue is lapis. So this is a Quran. This is a commissioned Quran. This is for a patron. It is for, it's not for necessarily everyday use. And in terms of size, the entire page, the entire large border, is roughly the size of a Post-it note, one of these long Post-it pads. So if we were to make it rectangular, maybe, this, I'd say 3 inches by 4 inches, give or take. And then you get the text, which is embedded within that. So you can imagine the type of skill that had to go into producing something like this. This next image is a mosque lamp. It is, so when you enter a mosque, there's usually a lamp that indicates, lamps throughout, but there's usually one particular lamp that hangs over the direction of prayer. And the verse that's on here, and this is quite popular on mosque lamps, is Allah nur as-samawat wal ard. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. 2435. So it's a very popular phrase to put in, obviously connected to the idea of lamps. This one is actually from the Met Museum. It is open if anybody's interested. I believe it's on display right now. I don't think they've rotated it out. And this one I quite like is from a little store in Egypt. You can tell by the hieroglyphics up here, the little Visa sign, that this is a store in Egypt. And the phrase here is, protect me from the envy, is a Quranic phrase, protect me from the envy of the envious ones, it's sort of warding off the evil eye. So again, just to show you how the Quran appears, not just in worship spaces, but in your more quotidian spaces, not just in the sacred, but in the profane, and how it comes up. And of course, if this wasn't modern enough, if the Visa logo wasn't modern enough for you, Sandow Burke, who is an American artist, not Muslim, created a text called the American Quran several years ago. And this is the image of his thinking of Surah Al-Fatiha. And what he did was he gave these, he looked at the Quran and he illustrated stories out of the Quran. So this is what he thinks of when he looks at Surah Al-Fatiha is this urban landscape, very specifically New York City. This, he's translated it as the opening. And here it says, in the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. So again, thinking about this tradition as being very much alive, as being an inspiration for art and driving the community. So as we come to a close on this, I just want to think about what is the Quran and how does it function. The reason we looked at Surah Al-Fatiha is because it is something that is very important liturgically and extra liturgically to Muslims. It is an oral text. It is a teaching text. It is a devotional text. It is, when it becomes written, it launches commentary traditions, legal traditions, calligraphic traditions. It allows us to think about meaning in the Quran and how we behave in those ways. So Surah Al-Fatiha then becomes simply a gateway to think about what are the ways in which Muslims interact with the Quran and how do arts start emerging out of that? And then what happens to the next order? The question that's open, that I'm not addressing today, but that is open, is what is the next order of art that comes after, now that you've got calligraphic traditions, what comes next, what happens next. So that's the big question to leave you with. And I think we can turn it to Q&A now. Manas, is that my understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I just put out a message that you can post your questions in the chat, or we can have a discussion. But I want to start the discussion a little bit while people are thinking about what they want to ask or say about this. So one of the things that, and some of my students are here from my class, the senior seminar, is in Surah Al-Fatiha, you have that, and you pointed this out, the cursed ones and the lost ones. So my students are not Muslim. Maybe they want to convert. That's great for me. No, just kidding. But but they're not Muslim, and some of them are practicing Catholics.
Yeah.
And because I'm at a Catholic college, and this is why it's so exciting for me to be teaching this. I think it's really important to be teaching the Qur'an to non-Muslims. But we always come to this conversation of like, the cursed ones or the lost ones or the believers or the unbelievers. And of course, we can do the tasfir, you and I, and we can use commentary, and we can kind of cage it. But then also some of the ways that we need to think about the Quran, and I think this is what I really love about what you said, is desiring for something not realized, right? I mean, this is something that you mentioned in your presentation. And so one of the things I'm trying to get us to think about is that we really don't have an answer with the one reading of the Quran, right? I mean, it's also in the Jewish tradition, right? I mean, you keep finding new meanings. So one of the things that happens, at least to me during Ramadan, is I find a whole new story. And I'm like, wait, how did I not know this story? It's always been there. I've read it throughout my life as a child, but now it's a new story, right? Or a new verse or a new meaning. And so I think if you could just talk a little about, even Al-Fatiha has different meanings, right? It's not just like you were saying, the oral, then the written, and this contained thing. So, and I'm trying to get us in that class, and my students can speak if they want to, and I'd encourage you to, is just be critical about the idea that there is this finality of a meaning in the Quran. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's so important, Manaz. I think putting on the hat of the believer, right? I mean, I do subscribe to the idea that the Quran is different every time you approach it. It's different for each person who approaches it. There's one of my favorite verses of the Quran is, and I'm going to paraphrase here, is if all the trees of the earth were pens and all the oceans were ink, with 7 more oceans to replace them, even then we could not write all that God could teach us, is this idea that we are ignorant and we will be perpetually ignorant. And embracing our ignorance is an important part of the journey of finding that right path, of finding that Sirat al-Mustaqim. Because I think it is, and I keep using this word pride and hubris. Part of it is because we're heading into Ramadan, which, curtailing that is important. But I think even approaching the Quran, it has to be a humbling experience. You have to come into it humbly. To say that I know what the Quran means is problematic. And, so I've multiple decades reading the Quran without giving away my age, right? Since I was knee high and bigger, approaching the Quran. But recently have been spending a lot of time thinking about the fact the phrase compassionate and merciful is repeated, which is fine in English. But if you look at it in Arabic, right, the word is Rahman Rahim, right? It's the same root. It's this RH M root that comes in. And, it's one thing to understand that it is the same root repeated. So what's the difference between compassion and mercy, which we could do a whole thing on? But then to realize that the root has to do with the womb, W-O-M-B. And to understand that this verse is saying God is compassionate and merciful, but that, the way I'm thinking about it now, the way I'm approaching it is God is also this generative space. God is the womb out of which we emerge. And there is within that also then a very strongly feminine quality. And when I say we emerge out of, right, the next verse is Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, the Lord of the worlds, right? And thinking about, well, no, God is generative of everything. And so what does that mean for the ways in which we approach the world, our obligations to one another, our obligation to other parts of creation, right? But that's a very different type of thing. But that's not something that I grew up learning. That's something that has that has opened itself to me, that I now need to explore and expand upon and think through. And I don't know if that's quite what you were getting at, but that's
No, and I mean, I think it's important, but also just not just teaching Islam, but it's also true of other traditions, right? I mean, I'm right now in a unit on Buddhism in my world religions class, and I'm talking about precisely this, right? Every time we understand what nirvana is, we don't understand it.
right.
But, it's like this constant, and I think that is, and why I mention it is because I think it's an important exercise for our students, our younger generation, and even adults that are literalists to keep looking for meaning. And I think that it has like a radical sense about that kind of reading and understanding that I think is important for all of us. So we're not in this finality, in this absolute truth, or this kind of like, okay, I know the straight path, right? I mean, this is the whole question about the straight path. But I have a question for you in the chat, Hussein, if you'd like to take it. And it's from Besa. Would you like to ask it, Besa, or should I read it? Okay. All right, she says here, hang on. Assalamu alaikum. When we learn about Al-Quran, a lot is being taught and mentioned. But one thing that I, as a Muslim, have been interested in is how it was revealed before it came to the Prophet Muhammad. Also, what is ahruf and qiraat in the Quran?
I'm afraid, Bess, I'm going to have to ask for clarification. I'm not quite sure I understand.
Yeah, me neither. So maybe you want to ask the question? No. Yes, the difference between ahruf and qiraat is what she's asking.
Yeah, is this something you've covered in class, Minaz? Just before I go.
No, I haven't. Bessa, you want to explain that to us?
Because I think I'm reading it much more simply than perhaps you intend.
Go ahead. I haven't talked about this in these terms. Ahruf has a revelation origin as far as I know, she says. So maybe just talk about your understanding of it. What is the origin of qiraat?
Okay, so qiraat is the particular recitation styles of the Quran. At least I think that's what the question is asking. And qiraat is there are what has emerged over time are particular styles of reciting the Quran for formal reasons. There are a variety of ways to recite the Quran. So if you go to the Swahili coast versus Indonesia versus Turkey, the casual ways, or even here in the United States, the ways in which people will say it is not necessarily properly trained. They do try to respect the word. They do try to say it with dignity and the respect that is due, but they're not formally trained. But in terms of formal recitation, like what we heard with that first Minshawi recording, there are only certain different types of ways in which it is considered a proper recitation, a formal recitation. There are competitions that happen all around the world around this. The two great documentaries that came out in the last 10 years, one was The Light in Her Eyes, which was about a girls' Quran school in Syria.
Mhm.
and the other was Quran by heart, Koran, a Quran by heart, which was about I forget, it chases 3 or 4 young children to an international Quran recitation competition in Egypt. As if you remember it better than I do, it's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah, it's like 7 or 8 kids, and they all go from different countries to Egypt for a competition. And actually, my students have seen, that was the first thing they saw. Just so
Well,
they could
okay, so
yeah.
there you go, right? So where the style of pronunciation, the emphasis on the words, all of that is being judged, and that comes out of there's a very long history. If you're, the really technical history, and probably still the standard on this is either the two, I should say, is Ulum al-Quran by von Duffner and The Art of Reciting the Quran by Christina Nelson. Both of which get into sort of the origin and the history and the art of reciting. But that's sort of where that comes from.
Yeah, I think that's good. She says, thank you. We have another question, and this question is actually a comparative question. As a Muslim, I have always thought about the correlative consonants between the Surah Al-Fatiha and the Lord's Prayer in Christianity, which I used to recite as a child at a Catholic school here in England. What role do you think that an exploration of prayers as such can play, bringing, I lost it, bringing
Muslim and Christian communities.
Yeah, Muslim and Christian communities together around shared spiritual aspirations.
So thank you for that question, Nadeem. I think that, I'm a big fan of projects like scriptural reasoning, where you thematically approach, something similar across traditions and read it together, with the idea that you're not speaking for the tradition, but speaking out of the tradition. So you don't necessarily have to be an expert on the material, but that you come in to discuss what's there and what you're finding out of it. I think there's a lot of potential in that sort of work. And here you're asking about prayers, which I think could function in similar ways. I think where I would encourage people to go is not simply to look for similarities, because I think sometimes that ends a conversation. But how do you respectfully engage with the difference? Why do we as Muslims not have the equivalent of "Thy kingdom come"? What does that mean? Your will be done as on earth as it is in heaven. So what does that mean for how we perceive our relationship with God? And I think that difference is very important. And I think there's nothing wrong with difference. That's how you build up. That's how you build something more substantial. And I'm not saying similarities are a bad place to start. Obviously, we need to start somewhere, right? We're always looking for a Yankees fan or we'll even talk about Mets fans, but we don't ever want the Red Sox fan. So in that way, you need to know what the boundaries of community are as well. Sorry if there are any Red Sox fans on here. But you're always looking for that commonality. And I think it's a good place to start, but it's got to go deeper than that. You've got to deal with that difference, because those are the interesting places to really understand and build community, in my opinion.
Okay, great. Rabina, Hussein, can you stop sharing so that we can see
sorry,
everybody?
yes.
Yeah, thank you. Rabina wanted to ask a question.
Hi, assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much. Very informative session. I had 2 questions, and I thought if I write it, I might have to make an explanation. First question is that there's so many translations out in English. Do you have preference of translations? Can you recommend 1 or 2 or 3, especially the one which is good for students or non-Muslims I'm talking about, that you can introduce them to? And what is the best way to introduce the students or your non-Muslim friend to the Quran? And the second question is that how important it is to have a teacher when you learn Arabic, because it's in digital age, everybody's learning Quran on online. So do you feel that it's still important to have a teacher who should teach you? And thank you.
Thank you for the question, Rubina. Questions, I appreciate it. In terms of your first question on the translations, I've dropped a couple. These are my preferences in the chat. One is the Study Quran, which is a bit more technical, but I think does a very nice job with the translation. They tend to lean a little bit into prose renderings. So that's part of the reason it's not my favorite. My absolute favorite is the Kuli Qurai translation, which I've mentioned next. Thank you, Minaz, which tries to keep some of the poetic qualities of the Arabic, and I think does a very nice job with that. Ahmed Ali is a slightly older translation, but again, is in modern English. I think it's very approachable. And Lale Bakhtiar's translation of the Quran. It's not only the first translation into English by a woman, but it is a technically astute translation. And it's lovely. The thing, part of the reason I don't use it in class, and I would like to, is it's cost prohibitive, but it's a lovely approach to the text. There have been several newer ones that have come out. And I think part of it just depends how you want to teach it and how you want to introduce people to the text. Again, I lean into the poetic translations as opposed to the prose translations. But Khalili's translation is technically very, very good, but it leans into the prose. So I think we are in a period where we are blessed to have a variety of different, wonderful, different translations of the Quran available to us.
One of my favorites, if I can just speak, is Muhammad Asad's translation, Message of the Quran. And of course, he was Jewish that converted to Islam. So there's something interesting there for me. And Lale Bakhtiar does a wonderful job with 434, verse 434 on beating women. I mean, she really does a fantastic job.
And I think it comes back to that question of who's punctuating the text that I raised before, who's translating the text as well, right? So having a woman translate the text brings a very different feel to the Quran than, the centuries we've had of men translating the Quran into English.
Absolutely.
And you can see the translations that have come after have really taken Lale Bakhtiar's readings of the text to heart and really transformed the ways in which they're approaching the text as well. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Muhammad Asad's, because I think his commentary is brilliant. That goes with it.
Okay, so I have another question. Assalamu alaikum. I'm curious about studies on the oral text tradition and acoustics vibration studies. Wow.
I don't know of any formal acoustic vibration studies. I know Hazrat Inayat Khan has written about the healing properties of sound arts in Muslim traditions. There's a book called the Book of Sufi Healing, which also deals with that. Oh my God, somebody here help me out. It's a new book on the sound arts of the Indian Ocean, Muslim Indian Ocean world, on University of California Press. And I can see the cover and I'm blanking both on the title and on the author. It will come to me. But I don't know anything about specifically about a more technical study on acoustic vibration studies. And Rubina, to your other question about do you need a Quran, do you need a teacher to study the Quran or to study Arabic? I think for Arabic, with any language, you need a human teacher. I think you lose so much when you don't have a human teacher who's fluent in the language and can teach you idioms. And, my French is very bookish French and people laugh at me when I go to Paris. It's awful. But for the Quran, absolutely, because this is part of the Muslim traditions that you need to learn from somebody else. You need to have this chain of transmission that goes back centuries. And also, to read the words is very different than to understand the words, and understanding comes through interaction. So I think you absolutely need a human being to teach you the Quran.
Is it called Sounding Islam, Voice, Media, and Sonic Atmosphere?
That's the one. Thank you.
Patrick Eisenlohr.
Eisenlohr, yeah. As soon as you said it, I was like, yep, that's the one. Thank you.
Never ever heard of it. Looks interesting. So we have time for at least one more question. If anybody has any comments, questions. Any students? They're all like, I can't believe she's asking us to do this on Easter weekend. No, for Dr. Freedy. Yes, Nadeem. Oh, you're laughing. Okay. Well, and any comments, Hussein, at all?
I want to thank you all for your time. Again, thank you for the invitation. I hope for those of you who observed Passover, it was blessed. For those of you observing Easter this weekend or in May, that it is blessed for you as well. And Ramadan Mubarak a week early. Or 2 weeks early.
And for those that will be thinking of Muslims during Ramadan, we'll be saying a lot of Surah Al-Fatiha during the Salat. So that will be constantly in our Salat 5 times a day, inshallah. So thank you everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. And Hussein, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Manasa.
Good night.